I've gotten to know a lot of people um, on Farcaster, but one thing that I noticed from this kind of like post a picture of you from a different era, right? It's like it was really. I don't know if you saw that thing on Farcaster, but like um, just the feed was totally flooded with just like other stuff that people had done. Like this person was a football player, and like this person was in a punk rock band, and just like it showed me like how my knowledge of people that I've gotten to know pretty well on Farcaster is still kind of typically like within their crypto era, and it was a lot
Yeah.
of fun to learn kind of the pre crypto story too.
So I've got to ask you before we even get into your story. I sort of I'm sort of terminally online enough to understand the references you're making. I think unless there's multiple of these, I saw Phil with a football picture. I don't know the rock band one, but I saw yours, and this is actually the thing I was going to ask before we started
Yeah,
recording. I think yours is playing like beer pong, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so is the guy either it's like a big lookalike, and no one caught it in the comments, but is the guy next to you by any chance the guy from Chef, or is that just complete lookalike?
It's a complete look-alike. Yeah, no,
Oh, really?
I
He
mean,
looks exactly like him.
no, it's not him. That would be cool if it
I
was.
thought that was like such a subtle like thing that was in there. I looked at the comments to see if anyone else like pointed it
Yeah,
out, and
that would be a huge flex. No, that would be super fun. I love that. I love that.
yeah. Well,
Chef.
now I'm just like it's just struck out on that one. But anyway, why don't we go? I don't know if you want to start with the beer pong game or if there's a more
Yeah, I'll start
sensible.
with the beer pong. So the beer pong is actually a good place to start. That beer pong photo that I posted on Farcaster was from the end of my senior year in college. I went to UNC, but like I also went to Duke because I had this thing called the Robertson Scholarship, which is like a couple dozen people a year where we would attend both like Duke and UNC for undergrad because they're only 8 miles apart.
Hmm.
Um, it was started by Julian Robertson, who's a Tiger Hedge Fund founder, and he grew up in North Carolina, had twin sons who like went to each school, and he was like they don't collaborate enough.
Hmm.
So he started like a Robertson scholarship where people go to both schools, which was a fantastic, like amazing experience for me. Ton of benefits to it that I'm super grateful for. But that picture, I and some friends like we organized like a beer Olympics at the end of our senior year where it was a competition between uh, Duke and UNC students. So like we had like a beer pong competition and a like flip cup and like beer bong, like all these different things, right? So like that picture was from I was like the UNC team that advanced, and we were playing the Duke team in beer pong, and that was like the final shot of that game.
So do you get to have a partner with both schools? You get to play for both schools, or what's going on? You have to choose
I
your
chose
allegiance.
UNC. Like UNC was my home school, so I spent 1 year at Duke and 3 years at UNC.
Okay.
And then Duke
So
had some people who would spend like 3 years at Duke and 1 year at UNC. Um,
okay. So
and
you
I
so there's never any confusion as to like who you're rooting for at the basketball games.
never any confusion. I did like uh, I camped out like because I had a Duke student card. Like I camped out in Caveville, like where the Duke students were. But I'm a UNC fan, and then before that I was like a Louisville fan, and I think both of those schools, as well as basically everyone else, hates Duke
Yeah.
basketball. And so we like a bunch of like UNC Robertsons. We actually like camped out, got tickets to the UNC Duke game, and went in like to the student section wearing UNC stuff. And the student council actually like passed uh, a rule that like basically prevented like you had to be like some sort of designation of full-time student so that could like never happen again. But we did get to go into like the heart of the student section with UNC stuff.
That's pretty funny. That sounds like borderline dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, if we were frightened about what Duke students would do, we wouldn't have
Yeah,
attempted.
it's a little less than like, some of these. I don't know which of these ones would get like legitimately violent, but I feel like it would be more like
Yes,
these
I
big
would think
soccer rivalries or
Syracuse, Connecticut. Like I'm not messing with those fans. I used to go to the Big East tournament in Madison Square Garden every year because U of L
nice.
was playing there. And man, those some of those Big East schools, it's like they're looking for a fight.
Yeah, I've been a Syracuse fan since I was a kid,
Really
and yeah, and so
nice.
I was like pretty young when they won the championship with Carmelo and Jerry McNamara and Hakeem Warwick and those guys, and it was fun. I didn't go to the Big East every year, but I probably went a couple years. And man, it's hard with college sports now. It's with all the transfers, especially with basketball. I've always been a bigger college basketball fan than college football. I really don't. For whatever reason, I've just never gotten to college football. Like I like the NFL for football, and but with college, so it doesn't really bother me with college football. I don't really care. But with college basketball, like it was amazing. It was probably my favorite sport, like including NBA, MLB, NFL, like all through most of my life, and with the transferring, like you
A
just don't get
lot.
guys who are committed to the programs, and it's just like sort of not what it used to be.
Yeah, dude, it's changed a lot. It really has. I think NIL, um, there's no sense of continuity anymore, and like I'm not. It just is what it is. Like I think overall, I mean, this is a whole nother story. Like the first version of of the of the project that's become Bracket, the first version of that we worked on in 2022 was called Nilly. It was an NIL crypto project, right? So
Hmm.
like this is the first thing we were working on. Like I'm in support of I think these players should be paid. Like I think they're figuring out a lot of how this works, but I really do see like as a fan experience, everything feels so transitory, and it's like I hardly know, the players that are on my favorite team in any given year, right? Like compared to when we were watching, it was nice to just like have pretty much the same set of players that you were watching develop over
Yeah.
time. I missed that element in both college basketball and college football. It is what it is. Like I'm in support of the players getting paid, but yeah, man, it's a bit different now.
Yeah. I also, to be clear, I do think it is, very well deserved that the players get paid. It's just a question of how do you do that without. I don't know exactly how any of it works, to be honest, but it seems that the NIL and the like constant year over year transferring, where that's like the norm more than staying, sort of came hand in
Yeah,
hand. And I don't know how or why exactly that is. But like
I mean, it
players,
doesn't
I
even
do
happen
think
in pro
could get paid.
sports. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even in pro sports. There's free agency rules that
Right.
are locking players into their original team for a good chunk of time, and that's a lot of fun, right? Like if you're a franchise I'm a Minnesota fan, so like players are very rarely uh excited to go to Minneapolis if they're a free
Right.
agent, right? Like, so they're going to New York or they're going to Miami or whatever. And so like for us, it's like it's great. You draft somebody and like we actually have Anthony Edwards for half a decade or a decade. Like it's amazing.
Yeah.
So, like, that's a lot of fun, but like I think college is trying to figure all that out right now.
Yeah. As a Knicks fan, I thank you and your fan base for giving us Karl Anthony Towns. He's been pretty stellar. I was a little nervous when that trade came out,
Yeah, dude,
but
he
he's been
fits
great.
really well. He fit. I like the Knicks. Like I'm actually, in the East. Like I just think they're such a fun team. And I was rooting for him last year. So like if the thing is, the Wolves they were in a perilous cap situation, and it was like they could either get some return on Cat, or they're gonna have to like let him or Rudy walk. And I think getting DiVincenzo was actually like from the Wolves organization perspective, like the key piece of that trade.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's why I was like skeptical of it because
yeah,
I wasn't like downright against it, but I was definitely a little, question mark because it was like
yeah,
we were giving up, Randall, who had like similar numbers to Cat. Like he wasn't, he's not him, but
yeah,
his numbers, just like pure numbers, points and rebounds and assists, like were like pretty comparable. And then also DiVincenzo, who had like a great season and just like a great, role player. And so I was like, I don't know about all this, but I
I
think
hope
now
it's a
now that he's on
win-win,
the
man.
team, I'm just now that Cat's on the team, I'm just like, wow, like this guy is actually a stud. So
He's really good. Um he needs to be just like what I learned about Cat, like unreal talent. His behavioral disposition is that like he he needs to be. He's not going to be the emotional leader of a team, and
right,
so like the fact that he can come in, I actually think that like it, Brunson is like a perfect complement to him because he's such like a tough, respected, like incredible leader. And I think Cat can just like do what he's amazing at, and he doesn't have to carry kind of like the emotional uh the emotional tenor of the team. And that never worked well when he was with the Wolves. And like Ant is so playful, like that it was Ant was kind of the leader, but I just think Cat's actually like a really good fit with that culture and can just like do what he's great at. And so I think it's a win for them. I'm still happy to have DiVincenzo. Like basically the Wolves position was we could keep Cat and try to win it all this one year, and then we're gonna have to like kind of blow it up next year, or we can like get DiVincenzo and some cap room and like have three shots at a title during Ant's peak. And I think that this year isn't working out, but I think the next 2 or 3 years are like uh more optimistic than they would have been. So I think it could be a win-win. I'm happy to see him doing well with the Knicks.
yeah. I mean, Anthony Edwards definitely seems like the guy who has the potential to lead a team to the ship. Needs a little help,
Yep.
but
Yes.
he's so fun to watch. Like I don't watch too much NBA outside of the Knicks, but I watched some of them during the playoffs last year, and he's just like unreal. Um,
Yeah, man.
so are you a Minnesota fan with everything pro sports or
Yeah,
like Vikings as well?
everything pro sports, Vikings, Wolves, Twins, and baseball. My mom's from Minnesota. We would spend the summers there, and like we didn't have a pro team in Kentucky, so like I kind of adopted all those teams from a young age.
Nice. Do you like are you obviously it's somewhat nostalgic, but Minnesota is one of those states I haven't had the chance to get to yet, but I've had this like sort of weird affinity to wanting to go, especially to like Minneapolis. I've just heard it's like a really underrated city. Do you like it up there? Or do you have inside scoop on what to do in Minnesota or where to go, or would
you know,
you
when
you
I
think
when
it's
I was
only for the
going, I was
nostalgia?
yeah. When I was a kid, I was going when I was a kid. So like, um, it was mostly like seeing my grandparents and family members, and like go to the Mall of America. Where it's like you're a kid. There's like a theme park inside of a mall. It was a lot of
Hmm.
fun. Um, but no, I mean, I was like when I was there, I was also just like I would go to like Vikings training camp sometimes, and like it go to Twins games. Like I couldn't do any of the pro sports stuff at home, so like that it kind of my time there was like uh a lot around the teams. And yeah, I think the city is there's like if I haven't been back there a lot as an adult, but like there is like a fun culture in Minneapolis of like the lakes. Like so during the summer, like everybody's kind of like there's all these different lakes that people hang out at, and they each have like kind of their own vibe, and like people have their like cabins around because it's known as like the land of 10,000 lakes. I think it's literal.
Mm,
So it's just like this big kind of like you wouldn't expect it in like kind of cold Minnesota, but during the summer it's like a very like fun outdoorsy kind of culture. So it would be fun to do that. Like I definitely wouldn't live there full time.
yeah. So obviously, it seems like you've been big into sports for since you were a kid,
Yeah.
and through college and everything. And
Yeah.
so, was with like Nilly and stuff? Was that and ultimately Bracket? Is this your first venture into working in
Yeah.
with sports, or were you doing
Yeah.
sports
Yeah.
before that as well?
I'll do kind of the background of how we got here, and then I can kind of
Okay,
tell you how we got into sports.
great.
So went to UNC and Duke undergrad, worked in management consulting at BCG out of school. Um, During that time, I was still I was when I was doing management consulting, I was waking up early in the morning and reading like Shakespeare and Plato, and because I had this uh, very influential professor for me, like at the end of my college career, who taught great books courses. So it was like reading the classical texts, and this was like a
Just generally great books.
yeah. So like kind of this like the quote unquote great books like the Western canon.
Right.
He was teaching. His name's Larry Goldberg. He was teaching this 8 course series. So there's 8 different courses, and there was like 2 of them each semester. And he like went through kind of the entire canon in order. And as a student, like you could drop in any course like at any time. And so there's some similar programs to it at like I don't know what it's called, but like Yale has this kind of a foundations course, and like University of Chicago has it. And
And
I
this
had
was at
already
UNC.
this is at UNC. I had already
Yeah.
completed. I majored in poli sci and econ. I would say that it was actually a disappointing academic experience for me. And but I completed those majors in 3 years. So I had like one year I was on scholarship. I had already finished kind of everything in terms of my coursework. And so I was just exploring, like trying to find if there was something that would be intellectually stimulating. And this Goldberg class was super interesting because it it was like this underground kind of popular thing. Like all the very ambitious students at UNC, like student government people, like scholarship kids, like they were all taking this class. Like everybody would kind of talk about it. A lot of friends had recommended that they were like, I think you would really like this course. Like it's really different. And so I had some time, took it senior year, and it's like the first one that I took was like just a whole course on Shakespeare. I was kind of skeptical. Like I didn't like Shakespeare in high school, actually. And but I realized afterwards that it was kind of because of the way it was taught. It's like,
Right.
what's the tragic flaw? Like, what's the theme of Hamlet? It's like, what is the most kind of like tired, boring, ways and questions that you could bring to a text? Like that's what we were doing in high school. And it's like I did the first class on Shakespeare with Goldberg, and I was like, oh my God, this is everything I've been wanting to think about and learn and I didn't even know it existed. It was just like an immediate click for me
Mm,
of treating these incredible texts as if they still have something to say to us as human beings. Like that's the key thing. Like if you come to these texts as if they have human wisdom that still applies, you will find incredible human wisdom. If you come to the text thinking that like this is a historical relic of the Renaissance, and we already know everything about it and they were primitive and I have nothing to learn from them, then that's what you're going to get out of it. And
right.
Goldberg approached it in an incredible way. I had like this incredible passion, but had literally kind of already gotten the job BCG like in first semester of senior year. So went ahead with that, but was like spending a lot of my intellectual energy just like kind of reading and learning on my own. Um, and eventually left management consulting and went to this place called St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, which is like a whole for graduate school, which is like a whole school. It's called a Great Books School. Like
Oh,
they only have one major. Like it's just called liberal arts, and you read the entire every student like goes through the entire canon in 4 years. Graduate school is like a condensed version of that, where you pick specialties. I specialized in I learned ancient Greek language and specialized in the Greek literature and philosophy, so like Homer, Plato, Aristotle. Um, Helped with a translation of Aristotle's Politics. Did a bit of like my own translation of the Odyssey and wrote uh, my master's work on that. These were uh, incredible years for me, like huge in shaping like who I am. I don't know if you noticed on Farcaster, but I'm still like kind of this is still like something that I'm always looking to sort of share um, the texts and ideas that have been influential for me. Like I'm always trying to point other people toward them, have conversations about them. Like I still run reading groups, both in person and online, in for this format. But I think when I was there, I learned that like I didn't want to be an academic, because I wasn't very interested in playing like the published to other professors game. Um, that I was much more interested in sort of learning and teaching, and like when you publish, you have to ask new questions, but I like to ask old questions. Like
hmm.
I like to ask the questions that other people have asked before, right? Like you're 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 reading if you're reading Othello, you should be asking what is the nature of jealousy, right? Like you don't need to ask like what what is the post-Marxist interpretation of like Othello's, position in Venetian society, right? Like that's new, but it's uninteresting, right? The old
Hmm.
question and the fundamental question is the interesting one, and those are not current. You can't really, survive and thrive as an academic by asking the questions that are actually interesting, in my opinion. So I loved learning. I loved being in that environment, but realized that it's like that academic career was one that didn't fit with what I wanted to do. Um, Moved to New York and had no idea sort of what to do next, but had learned some business and consulting, had done the education thing, and I just started building kind of without really having an intention, sort of education oriented businesses. And then I had built like a analytics system for SAT and ACT test taking. Um, and so this kind of got me into coding, which I had already had an interest in. Ended up building like a version of Khan Academy on mobile. So like it was called Peer, but like it lets students take a picture of their uh, homework question, and then they could share it with their classmates, and their classmates could like create a Khan Academy style video of how they're answering that question on their phone, and then post
Hmm.
it back to the other students. That was a lot of fun. It got branded as cheating in New York though. So there's like this is what made me realize kind of like the business of education. You're kind of like selling to schools and had to figure out all that stuff. So like that was uh enlightening. But it was my first chance to like kind of raise money and build product. And then I built an education business that was it's called Way Education. It was a we basically made custom educations primarily for tech forward people in the United States and a bit abroad, um, where it was we would either be supplementing the kids' education with like passion projects. So like a kid's really interested in like in filmmaking, but there's like no film courses at their high school. So it's like, what can you actually do? And so we would put together like kind of custom curriculums and learning experiences for them. That got into like a bunch of tech entrepreneurs and investors were pulling their kids out of school and starting their own homeschool, not for religious reasons, but just because they believed that like there was a better education experience possible and that they had like enough money to try to create that from scratch. So we started creating like homeschool experiences for families who were kind of interested in how they could like push technology, what technology was doing further, and supplement that with like real world experiences. So that business, I ended up, uh, it became very popular uh, with actually with Chinese families who were
Hmm.
bringing their kids to the U.S. or already had, and then so ended up ultimately selling this platform, which really wasn't very scalable, like just was something that I was interested in, but sold it so that it could focus more on education experiences specifically for Chinese families. That happened in 2019, so I had kind of time and freedom to look around, and that's when I got into crypto. And crypto was something that I learned about through a number of touch points, like developers who I was working with early on in ed tech. They were using they were using Bitcoin to like, buy drugs. Like, right. So I just had heard of this. Like, there's like, oh, you solve a math problem and you get this like weird money. And I didn't dive into it. I was just like, that's kind of interesting, right? Like, this is something sounds cool. I don't understand it. Didn't nerd out on it.
Right.
Then like some of the entrepreneurs, I built schools for venture capitalists in New York. Some of whom like I was around when they were investing in Coinbase, so they were telling me why they were interested in Coinbase and like why crypto was an interesting space like intellectually. And these are people that I really respected. So I heard of it from that angle. And then like a number of Chinese clients were trying to pay us in Bitcoin because like even though they were 100 millionaires or billionaires in China, the limits of Chinese banks in terms of how much you could convert into US dollar was prohibitive for people who were trying to use this like education service that we had. So I was like, why are these people paying in Bitcoin from China? Right. Like, and then I realized like, oh shit, like banks can block your money and like China can't block Bitcoin, but it's like blocking Google and it's blocking Facebook. And that's like when the light really went off for me. And I was just sort of like, I've heard of crypto from all these angles, and it's like this is too interesting for me to ignore anymore, right? Like I need to like figure out what's going on here. Like this is super interesting. So that kind of started my crypto interest, and built some education oriented stuff on the Arweave platform, like as part of a incubation program that they had. That's sort of first got in. Then started building more on Ethereum. I think choosing that chain was like really important for me. It's the right choice, and I'm sticking to it. And and then yeah, it led to John, my co-founder, and also like a best friend of mine from like pre high school. We it was in 2022. It was kind of like we could feel the bear coming, and John and I we were convinced that the fun that we're having in crypto is something that would be fun for what John and I called just normal people, right? Like just
Right.
people we know from friends from high school in Louisville, like our uncles and aunts, right? Like we knew that this was something really fun, but we knew that it isn't meeting people. It isn't meeting kind of normal consumers in a way that they can really dig into it. And so John and I, as you learned from the beginning of our conversation, like both huge sports fans, and we were just sort of like, look, sports is really, really fun. It's competitive, it's community based, right? It's fan based. It's like the energy feels so similar to crypto. Sports is so fun. Being a fan is so fun. Crypto is so fun. How can we bring these worlds together in a way that like that makes sense to people? So this has really just been our animating thing since 2022 is we just deeply believe that there's something really fun around sports that's possible within crypto. And we're not talking about just like NBA Top Shots pulls in like some card collectors or whatever. We think like fundamental like sports is like many people have a favorite sports team, and we think there's something in crypto that can meet all of them. And so that's kind of where we want to play around with creating those experiences, and that's kind of what's animating, what products we've been working on since 2022 within Ethereum and now primarily within Farcaster.
Awesome. Well, that's a great story, and there's like so many. Like I kept having something that would come up that I was like, oh man, I need to hear more. I mean, I need to like sort of ask about that and learn more about that,
Yeah.
and then we moved on to the next part. I'm like, oh man, I kind of lost that one. But three sort of like big prongs that I'll sort of like
Yeah.
put a foundation down right now. So hopefully we can get to them.
Yep.
One is, you clearly have a passion for like this, Western canon as you described it. And I think it's, there's a lot of people out there read a lot, relatively less, I think, than most people think, especially like people on Farcaster and, like
Yeah.
more of like an intellectual side of Twitter. Like there's kind of like an underlying assumption that like a lot of people read a lot. And I don't think that's really that true. I think like it's a relatively small, like people read like these books that you'll see in the airport or whatever, but it's like not that many people who are like grinding through books and like a lot of them or like reading them really deeply and whatnot. And so it's you sound like absolute like 99.99 percentile reader, and especially your focus on like sort of these fundamental texts, I think is really interesting to me as someone who I don't really I guess we're starting here. The other two things I was going to bring up are homeschooling and sports and bracket, but we'll get to that. So starting here, I'm someone who I spend a lot of time on a few things that are like fundamentally interesting to me, and it's not like a few as in like three. Like it ends up being a lot, but it's like I think a lot about like where do I want to live, like what do I want to work on, like these are sort of like fundamental questions, and I really don't think at all about the long list of other things that I could think about. And similarly with books, it's like I'm interested in random books because I think books I've for to set the context a little bit personally, I actually grew up kind of anti-books, which is I think pretty unusual. I mean people dislike reading for school and whatnot, but like I thought that books were dangerous because I think that as much as you might consider yourself a skeptic, when you go in and you read a book, you are just implicitly like sort of aligning your perspective with that of the author of the book. From my perspective, that doesn't mean that you're going to go read like a book about Hitler and become a Nazi. But if you read all of those books through your childhood, like you're either probably going to be like harshly against that or sort of align with it, probably. Like it's not just going to like not impact you, I would say. And so from a young age, especially like I grew up, I would say pre like super wokeness and whatnot, but especially if you grew up like went through elementary school, middle school, high school in these last 10 years or so, like you could sort of be assigned a reading list and have a teacher and whatnot that like could really radicalize you in some sense, in a way that you might not want to. And this maybe goes to show, why there's this interest in homeschooling, which I also want to talk about a little bit more. But anyway, so I sort of grew up with that perspective, and for the reasons, maybe it's just me making the best of things, or maybe it's sort of accurate, but I choose to reflect on that as being sort of a positive thing, that I mostly stayed away from books. Um, Sort of did enough in school to get by, and it taught me how to sort of like figure things out without, actually having like done the reading or whatever, which I think was sort of a valuable skill. And then I started reading sort of like in college, like more, for fun,
Mhm.
stuff that I wanted to read. And, so I've been reading since then, as much as, anyone, not like an insane amount, but, a little bit before bed. And if I really get into a book, then I'll devour it or whatever, and stuff
Yes.
like that. So I sort of have this weird, um, history with books. And the last thing I was gonna say is like,
Mhm.
um, I'm sort of like always drawn to like these fundamental books, but also,
Yes.
sometimes I get bored. And
Yes.
so there's sort of a balance there. And then the other thing I appreciate is like with a super random book, I think the value that you can get out of a book
Mhm.
is somewhat, like it depends on the absolute value of that book. And obviously that's sort of like a subjective thing. There's no like,
Yep.
list of like, how valuable is the book or whatever. But
Yep.
just saying, that let's just like sort of assume that there is some like sort of inherent value of a book. I think
Yep.
the other factor that needs to be considered is how widely read is this book. So if you have like a 9 out of
Yeah.
10 value book, but
Sure.
90% of the world has read it, or 60% of the world or whatever, it's like that will like sort of catch you up to societal knowledge, but that's just mainstream knowledge. Like that's not really going to get you ahead in
Interesting.
anything. And like you're not going to be that
Interesting.
far behind probably if you don't know this thing that everyone else knows, because it's just like, you might look dumb at a cocktail party, but like who cares?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
the other thing I sort of consider is like, well, if I can read this book that maybe is only like a 5 out of 10 value or a 6 out of 10 value, or hopefully it's like an 8 or a 9 out of 10 value, the best would be if it's like an 8 or 9 out of 10 value and like 100 people have read it, or like 1,000 people have read it. Then it's like you're in on a secret. You know what I mean? And so those are just like sort of a few perspectives off the dome that I have on
Yeah,
reading.
dude.
But I'm
I'm
just
so
curious to
glad
hear more. Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
so glad we're digging into this because this is just like such a huge part. This topic is such a huge part of my life. And when you're doing entrepreneurship, that becomes like just overwhelming of everything else that you do, as it should, right? Like that's what you owe that project and who you're
Right.
working with and your users and your investors, and it's great. But like this is a lot of fun. But your reaction is it's interesting on a lot of levels. I find it fascinating that you had an intuition that you could kind of be manipulated by books, which I think is actually true. The fact that you want to protect against it probably means that it was never going to happen, but which is kind of interesting.
Right.
I like, but it's cool to hear that. Like, I think I, I probably had something like it, but I wasn't as aware of it as you were. I'll just like my second thing on the point about um um your point about like reading things that are underrated. It almost reminds me of like a kind of contrarian thesis, right? Like of how do you discover a secret as opposed to something that everyone knows? Like that's actually the thing that's like super valuable. Um, and I actually think that these it's a funny thing because like a really cool way to pitch the great books that I hadn't thought about. Because like I like to try to get other people interested in it just because I like to be able to converse with more people about them. Um, and the great books are really interesting in the sense that what makes them great is that like if I name one of them, most people have heard of it. Right.
Mhm.
It's like that's one of their qualities is that they are kind of conventional in a sense, right? But what's interesting is that they aren't really read seriously anymore. So they are a secret. Like it's actually like a really interesting thing. Like people know what you mean when you mention Hobbes, right? But the number of people who have read beyond the phrase like nasty, brutish, and short is very small, actually.
Right.
And it's not about having something to be exclusive, but but in my opinion, like there's a reason each of these texts became prevailing in its time. And there's kind of a reason that they've persisted. And there's often like fire where there's smoke on these things. And so it's
Hmm.
like it I'll link this up as like the secret is, in my opinion, is that when you read Hobbes deeply, just for example, um, when you actually try to get inside of Hobbes' work and treat it as something alive rather than as a historical relic, um, what happens is that you get inside of it and you see things like, oh wow, like seeing it put this clearly, like we still have this today. And you'll see things it's like, wow, this is very different from the assumptions that we're making today.
Hmm.
Like the very, very interesting thing about going inside of Hobbes or inside of Plato or inside of Aristotle, the great reward is that you get, when you go outside of your time, you get to look at yourself and your time from that perspective. And that's incredible, right? Like that lets you reassess yourself and your current assumptions that you're not aware of, kind of from a level of first principles, which is like really, really powerful. So like these are why, like if you do it with any of these texts, you feel it pretty immediately. That it's one of the best ways to, by departing your own time and trying to get inside of the thought of some previous time's great thinker, you discover yourself and your own time in like this profoundly refreshing way. So it's just like the secret point is the secret that I think you get from reading great books in a sincere way. I think the secret you get is, what are the assumptions that we're making within our current time that we don't realize we're making.
Yeah. That makes total sense. And I think it's interesting that you were able to connect that because I didn't, I wasn't thinking of the books. I sort of, the way that I presented it was almost like saying like I'm interested in the fundamental stuff, and then separately I'm interested in secrets.
Yeah.
And you basically said like they're actually the same thing, which is
Yes.
really interesting. And it sort of, I mean, not they're overlapping at the very least.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's interesting because it sort of proposes, I think, a almost like a formula for what are like how to find secrets in the form of like not just books, but obviously in this case we're talking about like books as sort of the medium, but like
Mhm.
sometimes there's things that are
Mhm.
seemingly too valuable to have a formula for. And so like one of those
Mhm.
things that I can think of is
Mhm.
um like how do you come up with more great ideas?
Mhm.
Like that's, it doesn't seem like you should really, that there should be a formula for that. But
Mhm.
I found like for me personally, like walking and or running um,
Yes.
is like a formula for having more good or great ideas. Like I just will
Mhm.
have them more either while walking or while running or immediately after running than I would while not walking or running. And it's just like, it's not like automatically I go for a walk or a run, I have a great idea, but it definitely like increases the probability and the frequency.
Yep.
And so, that's sort of a irrelevant point, but I bring it up as sort of an analog to this is of sort of, if I draw from what you're saying, it's like you could sort of use time as a variable and say, what are some of like the most popular texts of all time
Mhm.
that are, you know, opposite to that, like not very, they might be known, um,
Yep. Yep.
but they're not, but they're not widely read. And it's like those are, it's sort of this weird
Yes.
what's the word, paradox, where it's like an obvious secret. It's like
Mhm.
here's, so like the Bible is the Bible is probably not a great one because it's, I mean, it's
Mhm.
decent, but
Mhm.
in the sense that the Bible actually is fairly widely read,
Mhm.
versus like
Mhm.
other texts that are super popular, but that one you're like sort of maxing out on popularity, and still it's probably like a relative secret in that a lot of
Mhm.
people are familiar with it and read passages, but like probably relatively few have actually sort of read it. But then if you
Yeah.
go a little bit down on popularity and like some of the stuff that you're talking about, like, you take some texts from Socrates, like how many people are, you know, digging through Socrates these days? Like it's a very relative few, but like it was back then, right? So
Oh yeah.
it's interesting.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I think that um, it the the fact that I mean, there's something like one of the things that I've learned is that there's something very special. One of the special things about our time, and I don't mean special as good or bad, but just different. One of the special things about our time is that the material science has prevailed as the definition of knowledge, right? So like it makes sense, right? Like we
What
created
what do you mean by that? I'm not sure. I
what
don't
I
know what
mean
that
by
means actually.
material science is the um the the type of thinking where we make a hypothesis and observe experience through controlled experiments and refine our theory, right? Like we can
Right.
apply it to physics and astrophysics and medicine, right? It's been incredibly productive a as a way of human beings being able to amplify our insight into how things work and what we can make, right? Like just massive victory. But like that perspective of like have a theory, observe the material things that happen and refine that theory. Um, that is now like what most of us think of as knowledge itself.
Right.
And this differs from previous times where, it might have been types of knowledge might include like revelation from a divine being. It might include like in the sense of the Greeks, like the Greeks were very interested in um in the question of like what is something. So like before we can do a scientific experiment about happiness, right, where we go measure it, the Greeks would ask the question like, what is happiness? How do we know it when we see it? Right? Like it's called I think of it as that's a pre-scientific question in the sense that you can't run a scientific experiment until you know the thing you're looking for. And science is happy to assume that, oh, this is happiness because the person who reported it as happiness, which is fine. That might be a valid definition. It might also be you're doing the psychology experiment and the people who called themselves happy were not happy. That's possible, right? Like we kind of don't know unless we think about what the thing is. The point is that the scientific mindset um, has, because it's been so successful at creating material success, we kind of think about that as what knowledge is, and that hasn't been the case across time.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation that I guess I am not surprised to hear, but I'm definitely not as intimately familiar with, as you seem to be with like, I don't have the historical context basically of all of these
Mm.
different perspectives from all of these different times to definitively be like, this is something that I noticed that's different about our times. But just sort of in absolute terms, it's like, it does feel that things have become, or that things are like quite black and white. I mean, you even see with like at a very sort of like topical level with, fact checking over the last several years.
Yes.
It's like people just really assume that these things are known, whatever
Yes.
these things sort of are. And it's
Yes.
like there are certain things within very specific contexts where, like, the score of the basketball game was 70-65. Like that happened. Like that's just what
Yeah.
it was.
Totally.
But there's like a lot of other things that are like much more sort of gray and have all of these sort of like underlying assumptions, like what you mentioned with like sort of the happiness thing.
Yeah.
Like if you're measuring happiness wrong good
Yes.
for you. Like you've sort of got these correlations on the experiment or whatever, but like it's not actually real. Like
Yeah.
you know, the assumption underlying the entire thing is just wrong, and you just didn't spend the time to think about it or figure it out because it would have probably like not allowed you to even do the experiment in the first place or whatever. Like it's just too,
Yes.
what is happiness is like not an easy question.
100%. And it's, I mean, I'm a huge appreciator of modern natural science, the thing that I just described.
Right.
Like I love it, right? Like I think it it benefits the human condition. Like there's no doubt about it. Like it's super powerful. I think that what's dangerous, and I don't mean this dangerous in some like global scale, but I mean just dangerous to individuals, is that like if you think that that mindset, no matter how productive it is, if you think that it answers everything, you're probably going to miss out on some questions and discoveries that would be very valuable for you, right? Because
Hmm.
there are human questions that come. Every science is enacted by scientists, and every scientist is a human, and and as a human, they're bringing a they're bringing an insight, whether they're aware of it or not, that helps them run their different experiences of experiments of all kinds, right? So it's like the human questions can never be avoided, and they shouldn't be avoided, right? They're fantastic and enlightening and helpful for how we live. But I think kind of it when you get a chance to realize like the scientific mindset is awesome. um and I mean that as we should be full of awe about what it does, but not everything. This is a very important thing to sort of discover because it opens up new sets of questions that you can explore. And I think the books that I'm reading as an example are like are one helpful tool for how do we really get how do we get outside of our own time to see that, and how do we see what types of other ways are there to explore these really interesting, like deep human questions.
Yeah, I like how you called basically this, you know, science like awesome in like the literal sense of like it
Yes.
should bring awe. Like I love
Yes.
the word awesome. Just this is
Yes.
totally like sort of random, but I love
Yeah.
the word awesome in like the literal sense when it's like it's such a powerful word when you mean it that way versus when you just mean like, it's
Yeah.
great or like whatever. It's
Yeah.
like there
Yeah.
there's like a very few things that can actually sort of like bring awe. And like
Yeah.
I think, the phenomenon of like science is certainly
Oh yeah, dude.
one of them.
Catching a rocket, like predicting and taking images of galaxies, like right, like this stuff is incredible. Like one of my favorite movies that depicts this cinematically is called Tree of Life by Terrence Malick, and
Hmm.
it has this like this epic 20-25 minute scene without any speech of just showing the awesomeness of science. And it's playing this like Brahms symphony during it. And multiple people, when I was watching the movie, like left the movie theater. Like they couldn't take it. Like they were like, what the hell
Hmm.
is going on? But it was actually just like it was trying to show how small how small science can make us feel, right? Like there were dinosaurs, there's a cosmos, right? Like now we know microbiology, like, down to like the atomic level, and just like there's like randomness at the level of the atom that's like composing what we are. It's like we see all these things that we've discovered, and I think it's really easy to feel like incredibly insignificant as just a mere single human being, like inside of all of that complexity. And um Malik does really a phenomenal job of making you feel that insignificance as a human, and then like telling this wonderful human story that makes you feel big again as a human being. And I highly recommend it to anybody. But it's kind of a great experience to kind of reorient. If you're ever feeling down or existential about like our condition as human beings amongst all of this. Um, and that's how I feel. I feel like the humanities, for me, are more awesome than science, natural science. And I don't say that in a confrontational way, but just my experience is that there's even more awe to be found in human experience and the human thought once you begin probing it, than there is in even in the galaxy.
So, a question sort of like related to this. You mentioned like having and maybe I know we're already over time, so hopefully we can
Yeah, it's all
go
right.
a little bit.
I
But
have a little time if you do.
yeah, I do, and maybe we don't even we might not even get to homeschooling or bracket. We could do another one. I'm planning for
Sure,
these to be recurring conversations in a lot of
sure,
cases. So,
good.
um, but the other thing I sort of wanted to ask was like, you mentioned, in this movie, people walking out for the same scene that you felt was awesome.
Yeah,
And it sort of reminded me back to this thing I was going to ask earlier. Like in high school, you read Shakespeare, didn't really enjoy it. And
yep,
then you come back and you love it,
yep,
basically because of the way that's being presented, the teacher and
yep,
everything. And so, um, as an independent reader, like not taking, classes or anything,
yes,
are there like, how do you, and I connect it to the movie thing because it's the same thing, and some people are absolutely loving it
yep,
and finding it awesome, and other people are walking out of the theater basically giving up. And so in
yes,
a reading context, it's like, being absolutely consumed by a book versus, closing it and not opening it again and giving up.
yes,
And for me, for a lot of these quote unquote like fundamental texts, foundational texts, canon type stuff,
yes,
I just kind of I can't really get into them. And
yeah,
maybe it's just because I'm too, you know, uh, it's everyone instant gratification of social media and whatever. It's like I just don't have the patience or whatever.
yeah,
But do you have sort of things that you know
yes,
that you've done over the years to sort of
yes,
open Shakespeare and find it awesome
yes.
versus
I
yeah, go
love
ahead.
that. I
Yeah,
love that phrase, open it. Yes. Yeah, dude, like I mean, the important thing for me was arranging conversations about the text, right? So like when you're reading something and it's only for you, that's fine. Like that can work for some people. It's like if the text is connecting. But when you know you're going to get to talk, you know you're going to talk with other interesting people about the same text. This is a huge motivation to get through it because it's going to be fun to talk to other people about it, right? Like
right.
so that's like a big part of it. I think the other thing is that the the way that you approach the text is important. I learned this from uh, Professor Goldberg at UNC. Like this is why he opened up. This is how he opened up texts for me. But I think that he approached and approaches. I still do reading groups with him and other students every Sunday. Um, he approached and approaches these texts as something that can still speak to us. And this is like not obvious. It may sound obvious when I say it, but it's just, as I said earlier, it's really easy to see Shakespeare as, oh, like that's like the guy there in the Renaissance. Like the Renaissance is when they're in this moment in England and they're trying to revive this. And like, here's the king, and this is the economic situation, and they wear these clothes. And like, we think we already know everything and we think that it's different. If you try to approach Shakespeare or Hobbes or whoever as like a human being who's speaking to the same primary human concerns as you have now, right? That's like the real way to open this up is you have to take their thoughts seriously on its own terms as if it could still speak to you. And this is something that just like we don't, because we're also, besides being very scientific, we're a very historical time. we have all of history. Not only do we have all of history, we have the internet that makes that history easy to access. And it's easy when you have a lot of history to think that, well, we figured this all out, quote unquote, we, but like what you're really doing is trusting whichever historian read that and packaged it as the sentence that you're going to receive, right? Or the paragraph or the article or the scholarly text, right? We're trusting somebody else's work on that thing.
Right.
And in many cases, those people didn't take the text seriously as I'm defining it in the first place. So like, I think that my two things, and I run reading groups on this still as much as I can, but like the a really really beneficial thing to your question of how do you open these things up. It helps when you get to have a conversation with other people about it, and it helps when you are uh, approaching the text as something that we can still understand, and it has something important to say to us as human beings now.
Yeah, I took that second point away from sort of your uh talking about the class earlier. That was probably like the most interesting, or like maybe not most interesting, but
Yeah.
the part that stood out the most of talking about that class, and sort of thinking that, I sort of had the thought that that was kind of the one of the main differences.
Mhm.
But and it's good to sort of confirm that. But then the social element of doing it as part of, like, obviously book clubs and reading clubs, like all these things are quite commonplace. But I never really knew, I couldn't. Some things exist and you don't know that they exist for good reason, but it sounds like they exist because that, or at least one reason they might exist is because that is actually like the way to read books, like with other people, which is not
Yeah,
how I've ever read books personally.
interesting.
So
That's a cool insight. Yeah,
yeah, so
that's amazing.
it's interesting to hear that. And
I think that books are solitary. That's a fantastic point. I hadn't conceptualized in that way, but yeah, I do think you're right that we kind of implicitly think that books are solitary because that's how we tend to consume them and that's how we can consume them. But there's a fantastic um, phrase from Xenophon wrote a memorabilia about Socrates, and Socrates defined his Socrates defined his favorite activity as um, as when he has leisure, what he loves to do is to return to the wise books of old and unroll the texts with his friends. That
mm,
that's his highest activity. Even Socrates, right? Like who's having all these. What he really loved to do is to take a text and and explore and unravel it with his friends. And I think that the emphasis on friendship there is very important because I think that the depth of friendship that you can form by having these kinds of conversations with people is quite profound.
so I know I said that was me, like kind of the last question, but I've got
Yes.
one more, digging into this a little more. So with the book clubs you've been a part of, reading clubs that you've run, are there common structures? Are you running these with, longtime friends or people you're meeting for the first time? Anything sort of about
Yeah.
the way that those are organized for people who either want to,
Yes.
some people might be interested in joining yours if they're able, but
Yes.
also,
Yes.
so you can speak to that, but also if people want to create their own, or like, how do you think about these sorts of things? What's worked and what hasn't over the years?
Yeah. Well, I think a core of people who have done it before within a given group is really important, right? Because like it is a different way of reading. Um, by treating the thing as like being alive. It's I can say all these things now, but it feels different when you do it. And so like I learned it from doing it with Professor Goldberg, and this is often like how a lot of things were approached at St. John's. And so I learned how to do it, and I'm mostly I mostly kind of teach other people how to do it by doing it with them. So it's like a very experiential thing.
Cool.
Um, and having a core of people, like what I would do, what I've always done in New York and now I do on Farcaster is like whenever I meet someone who's interested in that it piques their interest, we just try to include them in a group. And because there's already people who's doing it, there's this like critical mass of a thing that's going on. And so it makes it easy to just like whenever I meet somebody who seems like I think they would like it, I just try to include them in like one of the groups that we have running. And I'd like to do a bit more of this on Farcaster. I think my next project's going to be doing a long, like a reading of the Odyssey over a long period of time, because we have this like Christopher Nolan, a director that I love and a lot of us love on Farcaster, is going to do the Odyssey in
Yeah.
2026, and I think it would be super fun. It's worth reading on its own, but it would just be super fun for like people to kind of do our own sort of exploration of that and then get a chance to like see that film together. So this is something I'm going to get going on Farcaster sometime this year.
Yeah, it's funny. Usually the movie is like somewhat disappointing after the book. At least I haven't like. There's only a few movies that I've seen where I read the book or whatever, beforehand. But I generally do find that I have found that to be true. But it's gonna be put up to the test here, where you have a book of such magnitude as the Odyssey, but then Christopher Nolan's behind it. It's like, if there's
Dude,
anyone who's gonna do it right.
I can't wait to see what he does. To speak of like the task of trying to do that is, I think it's a fascinating observation is that like Nolan seems to be constantly seeking like a great challenge in his filmmaking, right? Like if you think about like Interstellar, like the not just the challenge of space travel, but like the challenge of what happens to time in space travel, like what happens to our conception of time, what happens to our conception of nature in that realm, right? Like then you have Inception with dreams, Tenet with like they're treating time but at a more experiential level. And I feel like Nolan, Oppenheimer, right? Like so it's like the greatest like practical innovation of the modern era with the nuclear bomb. He takes on these massive challenges, and I think that like it's very exciting to me because what I think this means is that Nolan, who I really respect as a thinker and a creator, he, in my mind, is implicitly recognizing that the Odyssey is of the magnitude of those other things. The Odyssey is as big of a thing and of a challenge as time travel, dreams, nuclear technology, right? Like which I think is, in my opinion, or like I wrote about the Odyssey, like it's one of my deep interests, but like it's so fun for me to see him kind of implicitly respecting that. I can't wait to see like kind of what he does with it. I think he's definitely got his work cut out for him.
Yeah, I feel like that could be I don't know if he's put out any details or if they even know yet, but I feel like that could like easily be like the longest movie of all time, basically. Like he already does, he's very comfortable in that like 3.5 hour,
yeah,
block.
I would be thrilled. I would be thrilled if it is. Like he's such an amazing storyteller. It's just and just creator. Yeah, I can't wait to see what he does. Look, there's a big chance that this will fall flat in certain ways, and it's just a really really hard film to make, in my opinion, because the story is so winding and so epic and so subtle. But I think we can have a lot of fun we can have a lot of fun like exploring the text itself in preparation for the movie. Like it's definitely like this is a project that I'm excited about doing in my spare time with the Farcaster community, because I know there's like a lot of Nolan lovers in, you know, technology in general. And it'll be fun to kind of use that as a way to get into the Odyssey with people in this world.
Yeah, well, I know we are well over on time, so I'll wrap things here for now. But
Yeah.
I hope we can do it again and talk about some other stuff, as I kind of got caught in the rabbit hole there. But
No,
uh,
it's okay. Like, look, maybe I think I'll do something about this on Farcaster in any case. So like, this can be our preview to the Odyssey reading group that gets going,
perfect.
and then we can talk about the other stuff I'm doing on Farcaster bracket side in another episode.
Perfect. Well, it's been and we did start with a touch of sports there. We just didn't get so far as to get to bracket. We got caught up with the reading and the books. So anyway, it's been an extremely thought provoking conversation. Really enjoyed it, and looking forward to sharing it with people. Anything else before we wrap, or put a pin in it for now and to be
No, but
continued?
man, I hope we can get you in the Odyssey reading group. It sounds like you have kind of a an interest in exploring more types of texts and new sorts of secrets, and I think you won't be disappointed there if you spend time with the Odyssey.
It feels like an intimidating one to start with. My like I'm very I definitely do. I'm hopeful that this conversation alone will change my approach to reading some of these types of books that we're talking about a bit. But like you said, it's sort of tough maybe to do that on your own, and so it might sort of require uh, that sort of being with people, talking with people who have sort of done
Dude,
it
you're gonna be like,
before.
let me tell you, you'll be fine, right? Like, I mean, you've had so many like this. I think the really important thing is that there is no these things are made to be approachable, right? Like, I think actually, if they're not approachable, something's wrong, right? Like with how we're framing it and thinking about it. They're really, it's just like at the very basic level, it's just super fun, right?
Right.
It's a really interesting, fun, engaging story, and then there's layers that you can discover when you look into it with other people and treat it with a kind of like there's something important to learn. But I think you'll love it. I mean, I think there's no risk that you'll be overwhelmed. You're already kind of interested in all this stuff and asking the right questions.
Awesome. Well, we'll follow up on that then. But thanks again for taking the time, and
Yeah,
we'll
man.
talk again soon.
Let's do it, dude. Good to
Uh,
see you.
have
All
a
right,
good
bye.
weekend. Bye bye.
Later.